I'm 39 now. I live in a quiet condo overlooking the city, the kind of view I used to think was only for people in magazines. My mornings start with coffee on the balcony, my laptop open, no boss breathing down my neck. I run my own small but profitable business, consulting in a niche I carved out after years of grinding. I don't live extravagantly, but I live freely. And freedom is something I used to think I'd never get. Because for the first half of my life, I didn't feel like a son. I felt like an investment being constantly reminded of its interest rate. My parents, both still alive, both still together, raised me with a kind of ledger in their heads. From as early as I can remember, they made it clear, every bite of food, every pair of shoes, every school supply was a transaction. Not love. Not care. A debt. Don't forget who bought that for you, my mother would say when she handed me something as basic as a sandwich. You think clothes grow on trees? My father would snap if I outgrew my jeans too fast. We put a roof over your head. You'll remember that when it's time to pay us back. They didn't say it once. They said it every day. The repetition carved it into me. By the time I was 8, I had internalized the idea that I was already in debt to them, that every breath I took inside their house was another bill waiting to be collected. And they liked to remind me. Sometimes subtly, sometimes as blunt as a hammer. When I was 10, I wanted to go to a friend's birthday party at the roller rink. The invite came with one of those neon-colored envelopes, and I was so excited I practically sprinted home. My mother looked at it, sighed, and said, "You're lucky we even let you eat in this house. Do you think we can afford extras like roller skating? You want to go? Earn it. Clean the garage." I did clean the garage. She still didn't let me go. Her reasoning? I never said cleaning was enough. You can't expect the world to hand you things just because you tried once. That was her favorite line. You can't expect the world to hand you things. But she said it even when I hadn't expected anything. Even when I was just existing. My father was more direct. He kept a notebook. Literally. He would write down expenses he considered. For me. Doctor visits. School books. Even when I broke my arm falling off a swing set, he wrote down the hospital bill in that damned notebook. Once, when I was 12 and stupidly curious, I tried to peek inside it while it was on his desk. He caught me and ripped it out of my hands. His face turned red, and he hissed, "You'll see this when it's time. You'll pay us back every cent. Every single cent." I believed him. I carried that fear like a second skin. Childhood wasn't laughter and scraped knees and bedtime stories for me. It was tally marks and lectures. It was sitting at the dinner table, eating spaghetti, and hearing, "That's another $1.50. Don't forget it." I know some people reading this might think, "Oh, they were just trying to teach you responsibility." No. Responsibility is teaching your kid to wash dishes after dinner, to save allowance, to understand work ethic. What my parents did wasn't that. They turned parenting into a credit score, and I was always defaulting. I didn't have the luxury of feeling loved without conditions. Every hug was followed by, "Don't forget what we do for you." Every holiday gift came with a remark like, "Better remember this when we're old." I grew up under the shadow of a debt I never asked for. And when you're told every day that you're an expense, you start to feel like one. Like your very existence is overdraft. I carried that guilt into school. I never asked for field trips, never wanted to sign up for sports, never begged for new shoes like other kids. I knew the answer would be a reminder of cost. My friends got to be kids, I got to be a line item. There's one memory that sticks with me more than most. I was 14, sitting at the kitchen table, trying to do math homework. My dad walked in, looked at my calculator and said, "Better get good at numbers. You'll need them when you're figuring out how to pay us back." He said it like a joke, but his jokes were never jokes. They were promises wrapped in laughter. By the time I turned 16, I was already planning my escape. I worked part-time at a fast food place. The paycheck was pathetic, but it was mine. Every dollar I earned felt like a crack in the wall of their control. I stashed cash in an envelope inside an old biology textbook no one touched. Each shift reeked of grease and humiliation, but I clung to it, because I knew one day it would buy me a bus ticket out. And eventually it did. But before I get to that part, I need to paint the picture clearer. Because what I did years later, what I planned down to the cent, wasn't some impulsive act of bitterness. It was years of being told I owed them everything. Years of listening to their voices echo in my head, "You'll pay us back someday." Well, someday came. And I made sure they got exactly what they asked for. No more. No less. I left the house in pieces, first in my head, then in my drawers. Socks rolled tight and stuffed into the lining of a duffel. Photocopies of my birth certificate and social security cards slid between the pages of that old biology textbook where I hid my money. The envelope inside the spine had grease stains from the burger place and a number penciled in the corner, $486.73. I checked it so often the graphite wore thin. The last week before I turned 18, my mother started calling it my Big Boy Week. She'd say it with a smile that had knives in it. Big Boy Week means big boy responsibilities. Your father and I drew up something. She laid a piece of paper on the table like a contract. It was handwritten, bullet points with neat triangles. Rent, $300. Utilities, $100. Groceries, $150. Back pay TBD. The TBD was underlined twice. You can't charge rent while I'm still in high school, I said. My voice sounded smaller than I felt. You think the world cares if you're in high school? She said, spreading butter on toast like a judge stamping a seal. You've been eating on our dime. You repay what you owe. My dad didn't bother with the butter. He tapped the paper with a ballpoint pen. Sign. It's time to be a man. I didn't sign. I also didn't sleep much. Each night I rehearsed the route, bedroom to hallway to front door. Which floorboards creaked. When the coffee maker clicked on by itself. I measured the house like an enemy territory I was escaping. The morning I left, it was 4:12 a.m. I know because the digital clock glowed at me like an accomplice. I put on my work shoes, tied the laces too tight, and hugged the biology textbook to my chest like a shield. I didn't look in their room. I didn't need a final scene. I'd had a lifetime of scenes. At the bus station, the fluorescent lights made everyone look like they hadn't slept in a month. I changed my last name in the ticketing system, just a typo, nothing legal, so if my parents called, they'd hear, "No one by that name bought a ticket." Paranoia is a survival strategy when you're used to someone keeping a ledger on you. I sat on a plastic seat that was cold even through my jeans, clutched the duffel, and stared at my hands. They were chapped from fryer oil. They didn't shake, not then. The shaking came later, when the bus pulled out, and I watched the miniature version of my town get smaller in the window and realized I had no plan after the first 3 steps. The plan I did have was simple: get far enough that my father's threats couldn't reach. Have a job lined up. Keep your head down. Don't answer unknown numbers. Start over with numbers you choose for yourself. I had a friend, Marcus, whose older cousin rented a room in a crumbling Victorian that had been divided into 5 apartments through sheer willpower and duct tape. The rent was $375 for a mattress on the floor behind a curtain. I could afford the first month if I skipped meals. I handed the landlord, who introduced himself as Nate the Great, and smelled like cigarettes soaked in black coffee, my damp envelope of cash. He counted it twice, loudly. "You got work?" "Dishwashing," I said. "And the night shift stocking at a grocery store, if I get it." "You keep both, you can stay," he said. "You fall behind, you're out same day. No hard feelings." "There are no hard feelings. That feel like a promise to hurt you harder." I nodded anyway. The mattress had a spring that made its opinion known every time I turned over, and the curtain didn't reach the floor. I could hear the neighbor's TV through the wall. The laugh track was a metronome for my fear. Still, I slept. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was mine. The first month on my own was a collage of smells: bleach, old lettuce, bus exhaust, the chemical sweetness of cheap detergent. I stacked cans until my arms shook. I learned which managers to avoid, and which ones would let you take home the bread the store had to throw out at midnight. I walked everywhere. My legs got strong. My back learned new languages of ache. I took a placement test at the community college and got slotted into remedial math. I wanted to be offended, but honestly, it was accurate. Numbers were the enemy I'd been trained to fear. The day I registered, I called my mother from a payphone because some part of me still thought good news would be neutral. "I'm enrolling in classes," I said. "I'll work and go to school. I'm okay." Her silence was theatrical. "Then, must be nice to have the luxury to play student while your parents are suffering." "Suffering how? You left without so much as a thank you." "Your father cried. He said we did everything for him. People ask where you are. It's embarrassing. We look like fools. Also, the family plan charged us an extra $10 this month because you used more data." That last part she said like a closing argument in court. I said, "I'll pay you back for the phone." "You'll pay us back for everything," she snapped. "And don't think school gets you out of it. You use the roads. You use electricity. That's our taxes." When I hung up, my hands started shaking like they were just now allowed to. I sat on the curb and let the numbers rearrange themselves in my head: tuition per credit, price of used textbooks, bus pass, rent, noodle packets. I wrote everything down in a little spiral notebook I bought for 59 cents. On the first page, I put a title: Costs I Choose. It felt like magic. I told my manager at the grocery store I needed a consistent schedule to make classes. He shrugged. "You can have 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. for nights and Saturday 3 a.m. truck day. You lift?" "I will," I said. "You keep your head down, we won't have a problem. You miss a shift, we have a problem." I didn't miss shifts. I couldn't. I drank terrible gas station coffee and learned how to sleep in 40-minute increments that added up to survival. My shoes wore out faster than I thought shoes could. I learned to tape the insoles so the holes didn't shred my socks. My father left voicemails that were performances. "You think you're a man now? Men settle their accounts." I kept records. "Don't make me come find you," he said, find, like it was a generous act. I saved every message and didn't listen to most of them. When an unknown number popped up while I was at the dish pit, I'd scrub harder, like I could erase worry by abrasion. There were bright spots, and they startled me every time. A professor named Dr. Singh who noticed I stayed after class to copy problems I couldn't solve. "You're not dumb," she said, not unkindly. "You're scared of being wrong. That's different." She showed me how to see ratios as stories, two things in relationship, changing together. "When you own the numbers," she said, "they stop owning you." It sounded like therapy disguised as algebra. Marcus lent me his space heater when my room's radiators went on strike. "Don't burn down Nate's Museum of Mold," he said. We laughed the way poor kids laugh, too loud, too fast, like if we could prove we found something funny, it wouldn't be sad anymore. On my 19th birthday, I bought a grocery store cake with blue frosting that stained my tongue. I ate it on the floor and watched the snow through a cracked window. I thought, this is what being a person feels like. You're cold, you're tired, you're responsible only for yourself, and somehow that is a kind of relief so big it scares you. The calls from home didn't stop. Holidays were landmines. "Grandma wants to see you," my mother said on Thanksgiving. "Do you know what stress does to an old woman? I can't make it. I have work. You always have an excuse. Ungrateful. We could have left you at the hospital, you know. Some people do that. We didn't. We brought you home. And this is our thanks." There it was again, the ledger, the implied invoice for love. "I'll send you money for everything," she cut in. "You'll pay us back for everything." I started putting aside $20 a week in a separate envelope. Not for them. For proof to myself that I could save. I labeled it dignity, then felt corny and scratched that out and wrote buffer. In my notebook, I tracked my hours, my expenses, my calories sometimes when the panic got weird. Numbers I chose. The spring I turned 20, I got promoted at the grocery store. It wasn't much, another $1 an hour and the right to tell new kids where to stack the cereal, but it felt like someone had slid me a keyring and one of the keys had my name on it. At the diner where I still wash dishes, the morning cook taught me how to prep eggs fast. "You got good hands," he said. "You could move to line if you want." School was slow because money was slow. 2 classes a term, sometimes one when the hours got tight. I flirted with the idea of dropping out more times than I'll admit. But every time my father's voice came back, "Get good at numbers," I pictured a version of myself who wasn't scared of a spreadsheet, and it made me stubborn. I didn't have much in the way of faith, so I borrowed some from spite. The last time I saw my parents in that era, it wasn't planned. I was hauling bags at the grocery store, doing that thing where you count the seconds of a shift in weights, when my mother appeared at the end of the aisle. She was holding a basket with 2 items in it like a prop. "You look thin," she said, scanning me like a barcode. "You know, if you'd come home, you could have a real meal." "I have a life," I said. It felt ridiculous to say in an apron. "A life?" She laughed. "Is that what you call this? You owe us, and you run around pretending you're independent. Be serious." "My father was by the rotisserie chickens watching." He lifted his chin. "When you're ready to do right by us, you know where we live." I said nothing. My manager peered around a display of chips like he was watching a wildlife documentary. My cheeks burned so hot I thought the heat lamps were on me. I bagged her items, milk and a magazine, and set them on the counter. "She didn't thank me," she said. "Your phone is still on our plan," and left. That night, I went home and canceled the number. It cost me a fee I couldn't afford. I got a new burner, a cheaper plan. I wrote the fee down in my notebook with a thick underline. Cost I choose. I slept badly, but in the morning I noticed I woke up without the reflex to flinch at the sound of my phone. That felt like stealing back a square inch of air and claiming it. By 21, I could cover my rent without counting quarters. I bought a used laptop off a guy in a parking lot, wiped it, and learned how to use spreadsheets the way other people learn a musical instrument, clumsy, then competent, then with a small kind of grace. I watched free lectures online. I made fake budgets for imaginary companies at 2 in the morning because numbers were now a story I could tell myself: income, outflow, assets, liabilities, balance. I started to realize I could build something with that story. I didn't know it then, but the first day I wrote Costs I Choose, I started building more than a life. I started building a ledger of my own. Not to become my father. Not to keep score on others. To prove a point to myself, that debt could be real without being a chain. That obligations could be honored without worshipping the people who demanded them. That one day, if I wanted, I could take every number they ever threw at me and own it. I bought a cheap calculator from the campus bookstore, solar-powered, the kind kids use for algebra. It had a scratch on the screen that made the number 8 look like an hourglass. I liked it. I kept it on my nightstand like a talisman. On nights when the same old shame tried to crawl under my blanket, I'd pick it up and punch in random sums, watching the shapes rearrange into answers. It sounds silly, but it helped. It was a ritual. Keys clicking, breath steadying. Add, subtract, divide. Balance. One night, after a long shift, I wrote a sentence at the bottom of a page and boxed it in. "One day, I will settle the account on my terms." I didn't know what that would look like yet. I only knew it would be exact. And when the time came, it wouldn't be a fight. It would be math. The first time I realized I could make more money with my mind than with my back was during a shift at the diner. I was 22, elbows deep in gray dishwater, when the owner's son came in with a stack of papers. He was complaining to his dad about how hard his intro to business homework was. Something about calculating revenue projections. I couldn't help it, I peeked. It was just a basic spreadsheet problem. I could see the pattern right away: sales, costs, margins. The same math I'd been teaching myself late at night with imaginary budgets. "You just multiply the unit cost by volume and subtract from sales," I said before I could stop myself. He gave me a look, then shoved the papers toward me. "Do it then." So I did. Quickly. Correctly. His jaw actually dropped. He muttered, "Damn, dishwasher's smarter than me." That was the first time it clicked. All the hours I'd poured into learning something as boring as spreadsheets weren't just survival, they were leverage. Numbers didn't scare me anymore. They bowed when I pressed the right keys. From there, things started to shift. I picked up freelance gigs online, data entry at first, then helping small businesses with basic bookkeeping. Nothing glamorous, but it paid better than washing dishes. I worked from the same rickety laptop I bought in that parking lot, hunched over a thrifted desk in my tiny room with the peeling wallpaper. It was slow. Painfully slow. But every extra dollar that didn't come from scrubbing plates or hauling boxes felt like a middle finger to the voices that told me I'd never amount to anything without them. My parents, of course, had no idea. I'd blocked their numbers by then, though sometimes new ones slipped through. A voicemail here, a letter there. Always the same refrain. You owe us. They wrote it like scripture. We fed you. We clothed you. You'll pay it back. Sometimes, on weeknights, I'd unfold one of their letters and stare at the words until they blurred. You'll pay it back. And a strange calm would come over me, not fear, not shame. Just certainty. Yes. I will. But not how you think. By 25, I had clawed my way into an entry-level analyst role at a mid-sized firm downtown. My resume was a patchwork of retail, food service, and college classes stretched over 7 years, but I spun it into a story of resilience and adaptability. They bought it. I'll never forget that first day walking into an office with carpet instead of grease-stained tiles, a computer that wasn't sticky with fryer oil, and free coffee. Free. As in, no one wrote it down in a notebook to remind me later. I poured myself 3 cups just because I could. The salary wasn't much, but compared to minimum wage, it was like I'd broken through the atmosphere. I could pay rent, eat something other than ramen, and still have money left over. For the first time, I opened a savings account with more than 2 digits in it. Every payday, I'd sit down with my spreadsheet, the one labeled costs I choose, and update it religiously. Rent. Utilities. Groceries. A line for growth, education, books, courses. And tucked at the bottom, a line labeled simply, debt theirs. I didn't touch that line. Not yet. But I watched it, like a hunter watching a trail. Success didn't come in a cinematic montage. It came in tired eyes, long commutes, and nights spent poring over textbooks while eating takeout. It came in saying, yes, to every miserable project at work until I was the guy people went to when things got complicated. It came in sacrifices no one clapped for, skipping nights out, wearing the same suit until the elbows thinned, living in apartments where the walls whispered with other people's arguments. But it built. Slowly. Surely. By 30 I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I had moved into a small condo, bought new furniture with my own money, and this was the real victory, paid off my student loans. I celebrated by sitting in the dark with a whiskey I could actually afford, staring at the confirmation email, balance, $0. 00. And that night, as the glow of the screen lit my face, I remembered my father's words when I was 14. Better get good at numbers. You'll need them when you're figuring out how to pay us back. I whispered to the empty room. You're damn right I did. It was around then that I began seriously planning. Not just the abstract one-day idea. No, an actual, meticulous calculation. I started with birth to age 18. I pulled average costs from government data, food, clothing, medical care, education. I adjusted for inflation. I cross-referenced it with some old receipts I'd swiped years earlier, ones my father had carelessly left in a filing cabinet when I was snooping for my Social Security card. Pediatric bills, dentist visits, school supplies. Every cent they could conceivably claim went into the spreadsheet. I double-checked formulas, ran scenarios. Conservative estimates, generous ones. If anything, I overcalculated in their favor. Because when I paid it, I didn't want there to be any question. It became almost obsessive. At night, after long workdays, I'd refine the sheet like a sculptor shaving marble. Line items, subtotals, charts. The numbers became my revenge letter. Every dollar was a memory, $18. 49 for new sneakers followed by a guilt trip, $47. 22 for a doctor visit weaponized into shame. I even accounted for rent. I calculated the square footage of my childhood bedroom, divided it by the size of the house, applied the average cost of rent in our town for those years, and prorated it. Down to the cent. And when I finally saw the grand total, printed out, highlighted, with footnotes, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom wearing numbers like armor. Meanwhile, life kept moving. Promotions came. My business consulting started on the side, then grew into something real. Clients liked me because I didn't talk down to them. I remembered what it felt like to be the one cleaning grease traps while someone else barked orders. I hit 35 with a portfolio solid enough that I could quit the firm and go independent. I built a team. I traveled. I walked through airports without that teenage fear of being tracked down. And all the while, the spreadsheet sat on my desktop. Untouched some months, obsessively updated others. Always there waiting. The last time I ever heard my parents' voices was on my 36th birthday. Somehow, they got through, new number, maybe, or they borrowed someone else's phone. My mother's voice was the same, syrupy and sharp. So, another year older. Have you remembered what you owe us? I didn't flinch. Not anymore. Yes, I said. Calm. True. She paused, like she hadn't expected that answer. Then my father's voice came on, rough with age but still carrying that iron. Then it's time to do right. I hung up, blocked the number, and opened the spreadsheet. Because he was right. It was time. That was the night I decided on the date. A clean, symbolic one. I circled it and read on my wall calendar. I spent the next 3 years refining, saving, preparing. Because when I sent that transfer, it wouldn't just be money. It would be the last word in a lifelong argument. Not spoken. Not shouted. Not screamed into the void of old voicemails. Just sent. Exactly what they asked for. And then nothing. The spreadsheet stopped being just a file on my laptop. Somewhere along the way, it became almost alive. I'd open it after long days of consulting, tired eyes skimming rows and columns, and it felt less like math and more like writing a story no one else would ever read. A biography of a childhood, except every chapter was a receipt. I wasn't sloppy about it. This wasn't some rough draft revenge fantasy. It was deliberate. Precise. I used U.S. Department of Agriculture reports for average food costs per child, adjusted for each year I lived in that house. I cross-checked clothing averages with old Sears catalogs I found on eBay, just to match the era. For medical, I pulled national averages for pediatric care and overlaid them with receipts I'd secretly kept. The dentist bill for a filling, the cast for my broken arm, the chickenpox vaccination that my mother complained about for months. I broke it down into categories. Housing, my square footage versus house total. Food per age bracket, adjusted for inflation. Clothing, averaged, plus receipts when available. Medical. Education-related expenses, books, supplies, field trips they complained about. Utilities, prorated by room share. Each had subcategories, subtotals, footnotes. The kind of thing my father, with his sacred little notebook, would have salivated over. Except this time, I held the pen. When I finished the first draft, I stared at the total number. It looked absurdly large, and yet I knew it was right. Years of them throwing around vague claims like, "You owe us thousands," had finally crystallized into a cold, exact sum. I printed it. Put it in a folder. Labeled it, Final Debt Statement. I didn't just prepare the math. I prepared myself. At 36, when I decided on the date, my 40th birthday, 4 years away, I began restructuring everything. Business accounts separate from personal. Investments positioned to free up liquidity by that exact year. I automated as much of my financial life as possible, so when the day came, the transfer would be just another scheduled transaction. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent years weaponizing money against me, and here I was, turning money into my weapon. But not their kind of weapon. Not threats, not guilt trips. Just clean arithmetic. The closer the date came, the more obsessive I got about details. Some nights, I'd lie awake wondering if they'd argue about interest. After all, they'd said, "Pay us back someday." In their minds, that probably meant a growing balance, compounding resentment. So, I ran those numbers too. Interest at 2%, 5%, even 10%. I calculated every version of the debt, stacked them like cards in a deck. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, I added a tab called With Interest, Hypotheticals. And then one night I deleted it. Because the truth was, I wasn't negotiating with them anymore. This wasn't about what they thought. It was about what I decided. And what I decided was, principal only. No interest. Not a penny more. They didn't get to profit from me. Meanwhile, my business grew. I had employees now. People who looked to me for paychecks, for leadership. Sometimes I'd catch myself repeating phrases my parents used, about responsibility, about working hard, and I'd stop mid-sentence, heart thudding. I'd reframe it. I'd say, "We all contribute, but no one here owes me their soul. Do your work, take your pay, live your life." And every time I said it, I felt like I was reparenting myself. The year before the date, I took a trip overseas. First real vacation of my life. Rome, then Florence, then a train to Venice. I walked through cathedrals with ceilings so high they made me dizzy, ate pasta at tables where no one asked me to sign a ledger afterward. On my last night in Venice, I sat on the steps near the Grand Canal with a glass of cheap wine, watching the water lap at the stones. And I thought about how far I'd come from the kid hiding cash in a biology textbook. I pulled out my phone, opened the spreadsheet. The number glowed on the screen in euros after a quick currency conversion. I whispered, "For years," into the night air. A gondola slid past, the oar dipping silently. It felt like a vow. When I got back home, I tightened the plan even more. I set up a separate high-yield savings account, invisible to my day-to-day finances. I transferred money into it monthly, earmarked specifically for debt repayment. Watching it grow felt surreal. Like loading a bullet I knew I'd never have to fire twice. I also drafted the transfer note. Just 3 words: debt repaid. Goodbye. I typed them into the memo line of a dummy transfer, just to see them on the screen. My chest clenched when I hit preview. It was perfect. Cold. Final. I saved a screenshot, printed it, slid it into the same folder as the spreadsheet. The months ticked down. 39 years old, counting toward 40 like a clock counting down to detonation. I kept imagining their reactions. My mother, opening her bank app, gasping like she just won the lottery. My father, silent at first, then maybe angry when he realized the memo line meant this wasn't generosity, it was closure. I pictured them calling me, over and over, numbers I'd never answer. Emails I'd never read. Their fury boiling against a wall of silence. For once, they'd have all the time in the world to tally and demand, but no audience. The thought didn't make me giddy. It didn't even make me smile. It just made me calm. Like a storm that had raged for decades was finally going to burn itself out. As the date approached, I tested everything. Small transfers, to confirm account routing. Redundancies in case banks flagged the transaction. I even visited the branch in person, talking to a banker in a suit who had no idea the history behind my request. "I'll need to execute a large transfer on this date," I said steady. "No problem," he replied. "Just set it up in advance." He clicked his keyboard, log notes. To him, it was Tuesday. To me, it was a lifetime. The night before my 40th birthday, I didn't sleep much. I sat at my desk, folder open, spreadsheets stacked neatly beside me. My apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge. I thought about every sandwich my mother had sneered over, every bill my father had scribbled into his little notebook. I thought about the phrase, "You'll pay us back someday." And for the first time, I didn't feel the old shame. I felt ready. Because the debt was about to be repaid. Not with love. Not with guilt. Not with interest. Just numbers. Their language. Their rules. And then silence. The morning of my 40th birthday felt strange. Quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I woke before my alarm, sunlight creeping through the blinds, and lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. My chest wasn't tight. My hands weren't trembling. For once, there was no dread of the day ahead. Just stillness. I made coffee the way I always do, French press, 2 scoops, timer set for 4 minutes. The ritual grounded me. I sat on the balcony with the steam rising against the cool air, watching the city wake up below me. Somewhere out there, people were stuck in traffic, late for meetings, rushing through their lives. And here I was, about to settle the longest debt I'd ever carried. After the last sip, I went inside, turned on my laptop, and opened the folder. The spreadsheet. The printout. The screenshot of the memo line. They were all waiting for me like soldiers lined up in formation. I logged into my bank account. The numbers glowed back, balance healthy, transfer capability confirmed. I opened the saved transfer draft I'd built weeks earlier. Their account information was already filled in. I'd gotten it years ago when they once demanded I send money, for groceries, while I was still in college. I'd kept it, untouched, like a chess piece waiting for the endgame. Amount, final total. Memo line, debt repaid. Goodbye. I hovered over the submit button. For a second, I thought about all the versions of me that had led here. The kid counting quarters for a bus ticket, the teenager sneaking out at 4 a.m., the dishwasher with cracked hands, the analyst in a second-hand suit, the man in Venice staring at his spreadsheet like a prophecy. All of them stood in the room with me. All of them waiting. I clicked. Processing. Confirmation number, 356759. Transfer complete. And that was it. No fireworks. No thunderclap. Just a small digital receipt sliding across the screen. I sat back in my chair, exhaled, and realized I'd been holding my breath without noticing. My body felt lighter, like I'd dropped something I didn't even know I was carrying. The phone rang an hour later. An unknown number. I didn't answer. Then another. Then another. A voicemail popped up, then 3 more. I didn't listen. I deleted them without opening. I had already blocked every number I knew was theirs, but I expected this. Burner phones, borrowed phones, desperate reaching. I made a new rule for myself. I would never again hear their voices. Not even by accident. So I opened my settings, blocked all unknown calls, filtered unknown emails to trash, tightened my social media privacy to ironclad. Digital silence became my fortress. The rest of the day, I let myself do nothing heavy. No work, no numbers. I took myself out to lunch at a nice restaurant, one with white tablecloths, the kind my parents would have called wasteful. I ordered wine without checking the price, steak without guilt. When the bill came, I tipped generously. Not because anyone demanded it. Not because I owed it. Because I chose to. That was the difference. By evening, the messages had stopped. My phone sat quiet on the table. I poured another drink, dimmed the lights, and opened the spreadsheet one final time. At the bottom, under the grand total, I added one more line. Adjustment, final total. Balance, $0. 00. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I closed the file, moved it into a folder called Closed Accounts, and dragged the whole folder onto an external drive. After that, I deleted it from my laptop. Gone. The strangest part was how undramatic it felt. I thought I'd cry. I thought I'd shake with adrenaline. Instead, there was only a quiet sense of rightness, like a long equation had finally solved itself. I sat on the couch, watching the city lights flicker on, and whispered, "We're done." Not to them. To myself. To every younger version of me still waiting for the other shoe to drop. The next morning, I woke up lighter. It wasn't joy exactly, but something deeper, clarity. I brewed coffee again, sat on the balcony, and realized that for the first time, there was no debt hanging over me. Not financial, not emotional, not implied. They had what they always wanted, their payment. And I had what I always needed, silence. I checked my phone just once. No new calls. No new emails. Just peace. I know some people might ask, why pay them at all? Why not just cut them off years earlier and be done? The truth is, it wasn't about them. Not anymore. It was about me. About closing the loop they built around my life. About taking their own twisted language, debt, repayment, ledger, account, and using it to end the story on my terms. If I'd simply disappeared without paying, part of me would have always worried they were right. That maybe I did owe them something. That ledger would have stayed open in my head. But now, the balance was 0. Exact. Documented. Final. And the only thing left was freedom. That night, I slept deeper than I had in decades. No dreams of their voices. No visions of ledgers or notebooks. Just quiet. For the first time, I felt like a person who had never been a line item at all. The first week after the transfer felt almost unreal, like walking around in a house where a loud machine had finally been shut off. At first, I kept expecting the noise to come back, the constant hum of debt, guilt, and expectation. My brain was conditioned to anticipate the next reminder, the next jab, the next phone call that said, "Don't forget what you owe us." But the silence held. No new calls got through. No emails slipped past the filters. Their voices, which had once been the soundtrack to my entire life, were gone. It was disorienting at first. Like walking into a room where the furniture had been rearranged. I caught myself reaching for the old reflexes, rehearsing defensive explanations in my head, drafting imaginary apologies I'd never send, bracing for questions that never came. By the second week, those habits started to fade. My shoulders loosened. My jaw unclenched. I could sit at my desk without waiting for my phone to buzz with a demand. That silence, it wasn't empty. It was space. The months that followed were a strange kind of detox. I'd always carried their words inside me like background programs on a computer. You're a burden. You owe us. We gave you everything. You'll pay it back. Without their constant reinforcement, those programs started to crash. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I'd still hear an echo, like my father's voice muttering, "Settle your accounts." But it no longer had power. It was just static, fading each day. I noticed little changes first. Grocery shopping, for instance. For years, I'd buy the cheapest brands automatically, not because I had to anymore, but because my parents had drilled thrift into me as shame. "You don't deserve better," was the unspoken rule. One afternoon, I reached for generic pasta sauce, then paused. My hand hovered. I picked up the more expensive jar. It wasn't about taste, it was about choice. Standing there in the aisle, I whispered to myself, "Cost I choose." And I smiled. Another night, I booked a weekend getaway without overthinking it. No guilt, no phantom lecture about wasting money. Just me, a bag, and a short flight to a cabin by the sea. I walked the shoreline for hours, listening to gulls and waves, and felt like I was relearning how to breathe. The people close to me noticed too. My assistant at work asked if I had started meditating. "You seem calmer," she said. "Less tense." A friend I'd known for years told me I laughed differently now. Freer. Not like I was waiting for permission. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been wound until the coils started to unravel. Of course, the silence wasn't just peaceful. It was also final. And finality has weight. There were nights I lay awake thinking, that's it. That's the last chapter. I'll never see them again. Never hear their voices except in memory. They'll never know my life beyond that wire transfer. Part of me mourned, not them, but the idea of parents I never had. The version of childhood where love wasn't measured in receipts. That grief was quiet, but it was real. I let myself feel it, then let it go. Because the truth was, I hadn't lost parents. I'd lost creditors disguised as parents. And that was no loss at all. Work flourished. With my head clearer, I poured energy into my business. I expanded into new markets, hired more staff, mentored younger consultants who reminded me of myself 10 years earlier, hungry, cautious, afraid of failure. I told them the opposite of what I was told. "You don't owe me for teaching you. Just pass it on someday. That's enough." Watching their eyes light up when they realized there were no strings attached, it healed something in me I hadn't known was still raw. I became, in a strange way, the parent I had needed. Not to children of my own. I never wanted kids, maybe because of how I was raised, but to the people who crossed my professional path. I gave what I was denied, mentorship without a ledger. About 6 months after the transfer, curiosity got the better of me. I logged into the bank account I'd sent the money from, not to check balances but to confirm the transfer had cleared. No reversals, no disputes. Just gone. I pictured them opening their account that morning. My mother gasping, calling my father over. My father's pride mixing with confusion. Maybe they argued about it. Was it too little? Was it enough? Did it mean I'd come back? I would never know. And that not knowing was its own kind of freedom. Because whatever they thought, whatever story they spun about me afterward, it didn't matter. My side of the ledger was closed. Their side could rot. 1 year later, on my 41st birthday, I made a new spreadsheet. Not one about debts or repayments. This one was titled Freedom Fund. It wasn't about anyone else. Just me. Future trips I wanted to take, hobbies I wanted to learn, experiences I'd postponed. I listed them all like expenses: guitar lessons, a safari, a cooking course in Thailand, a library of books I'd always told myself were too indulgent. For the first time, numbers weren't chains. They were possibilities. I think the strangest revelation was this: closure isn't loud. It doesn't always look like a confrontation, or a shouting match, or a slammed door. Sometimes closure is just a line item balanced, a weight lifted, and the quiet that follows. The revenge wasn't the money itself. It was the silence afterward. The fact that for the rest of their lives, they could scream into the void about what I owed, but I would never hear it. That was the victory. Looking back, I realized the real freedom wasn't the transfer. It was what came after, the months of ordinary living where their absence became normal. Where I stopped bracing for impact and started planning for joy. I hadn't just repaid a debt. I'd reclaimed my life. And the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. 2 years have passed since I pressed that button and ended it all with a wire transfer and 4 words: debt repaid. Goodbye. I'm 39 going on 41 now. My condo is the same, my business is steady, my life has rhythms I never imagined I'd be allowed to have. But the real change, the thing I keep coming back to, has nothing to do with square footage or bank balances. It's the quiet. The quiet of not waiting for the phone to buzz with accusations. The quiet of grocery aisles where I buy what I want without hearing phantom voices in my head. The quiet of holidays where I don't brace for guilt trips about not coming home. That silence has become the soundtrack of my life. And I don't think I'll ever get tired of it. People sometimes ask about my parents. Casual acquaintances, colleagues who assume everyone has normal family ties, strangers who hear me mention I'm no contact. Do you ever regret it? They ask. And the answer is simple: no. I don't regret paying them back. I don't regret cutting them off. I don't regret choosing numbers over words when it came to closure. Because the truth is, love isn't a transaction. Parenting isn't a ledger. Children don't owe their existence as a debt to be collected. I spent half my life believing otherwise because 2 people convinced me it was true. But the other half of my life, the half I'm in now, proves them wrong every single day. Sometimes, though, I think about that younger version of me. The boy sitting at the dinner table, hearing his father say, "That's another $1.50. Don't forget it." The teenager sneaking out at 4:12 a.m., clutching a biology textbook full of crumpled bills. The dishwasher staring at numbers on a page like they were weapons. If I could sit across from him now, I'd tell him, "They were wrong. You don't owe them your life. You never did. The debt you think you're drowning in, it isn't real. And one day, you'll prove it by paying it back not with tears or obedience, but with precision. And then you'll walk away. And it will be over." I think he'd cry. I think he'd laugh too, disbelieving. But I think he'd feel hope for the first time. The irony isn't lost on me. The only way to win was to play their game: money, math, ledgers, and then flip the board. To give them exactly what they demanded, not a cent more, not a cent less. To let the transaction stand as the last word, a period at the end of a sentence they started before I could even speak. It wasn't about generosity. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about precision. And that precision gave me peace. These days, my spreadsheets track different things: investments, vacations, donations to causes I believe in, not out of obligation, but out of choice. My numbers finally serve me, not the other way around. Sometimes I think about how my father kept that notebook of expenses like it was scripture. I imagine him flipping through it now, seeing the wire transfer in his account, trying to reconcile the two. Maybe he rages that it's not enough. Maybe he convinces himself it proves he was right all along. But none of that matters. He can preach to his ledger until the ink fades. I'll never hear it. The account is closed. The closure, for me, came not just in sending the money, but in the life I've built afterward. The laughter with friends that doesn't come with a bill attached. The mentorship I give without strings. The mornings on my balcony where I sip coffee and realize the air feels different when no one is tallying the cost of your existence. That's what freedom tastes like. Coffee on a quiet morning. Pasta sauce you chose yourself. A calendar filled with plans that belong only to you. If anyone reading this grew up like I did, under parents who turned care into a contract, who made you feel like every sandwich was a loan and every hug a liability, I want you to know something. The debt isn't real. Yes, they may have spent money. Yes, they may have provided shelter, food, clothes. But those things aren't gifts you have to repay. They're the bare minimum of parenting. And if they try to convince you otherwise, remember, you get to decide what ledger you carry. You get to decide when the account closes. Mine closed with a transfer. Yours might close with a block number, a move across the country, or simply the decision to stop listening. Whatever it looks like, the power is yours, not theirs. Sometimes people ask if I miss them. I don't. What I miss is the idea of parents. The fantasy version where love is unconditional and childhood isn't itemized. But I never had those parents. I had creditors who wore the mask of family. And you can't miss what you never truly had. What I have now is better, peace, freedom, and the knowledge that I broke the cycle. I've thought about what would happen if they died tomorrow. Would I go to the funeral? Would I stand there silent, while people talked about their sacrifices, their dedication, their love? The answer is no. I already buried them in my life the day I pressed submit on that transfer. That was the funeral. That was the eulogy. That was the end. The rest is just silence. And for me, that silence is not emptiness. It's everything. So here I am, 41 years old, living proof that sometimes the cleanest revenge is math. That sometimes closure comes not from shouting, but from balancing the books in your own way. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel guilt. I don't feel tied to them at all. I feel free. And freedom, I've learned, doesn't need a memo line.